Hello, Deep Mindfulness Collective. This right here, right now, is the joy of being a live stream coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. If you're watching this anywhere other than this web address, just come on over and you can be part of the chat conversation and we can hang out. If you're watching this on playback, just know we'd love to have you here as a visitor, but we also just love having you over. So thanks for joining. Let's take a peek here at the chat. Folks, let us know where you are coming from. It's always nice to say hello as we begin here. Chat program, please open. Thank you. We're just, myself, Raquel, and our friend Colin, who's often on the stream. We're just chatting, and he was here having a nice time. Oh, there's two windows opening, I see. Okay, we're here. I don't want that, thank you. Dejesh, Maury, welcome. Good to see you here. As folks are beginning to trickle in, thank you for joining us. We're going to be doing some hanging out. Tech support coming to us live from India. Welcome. And other folks, let us know where you're coming from. I have good news, folks. We're going to change things up today. We're going to do a little meditation, which I thought would be fun. And yeah, that's the general idea. I think I lost the part of my computer. Okay, so we'll meditate for about 25 minutes. Then we will jump into Q&A. Big news, Raquel is going to be joining us as she has been known to do. So, sorry, I have something stuck in my mouth. So the news is Raquel will be here. Very exciting. Friday, 5 p.m. At Karlstad office. Welcome from Sweden, Nick, or Nikke, as you like to be called. Just kidding. So, okay, folks, we're going to meditate for 25 minutes, and then I want to hear those questions. We had some folks jump on the Discord last time, and I'm going to, right now, produce ourselves a little link-a-doodle. And throw that in the chat. This is the link for the Discord. Hey, why didn't you paste? There you go. There's a link for the Discord, so feel free to jump onto that when we are finished, and then you can jump into the chat. I mean the voice chat. I think my dog is out. Babe, will you put the dog away? Yeah. Thank you. I'd ask Raquel to put the puppy away. Because she's a noisy one. She'll start making noises if it's too quiet for too long. Okay, folks. Finding that nice, comfortable position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit. And once I hear that my dog is put away, we'll slide into our practice. Good? All right. Well, here we go. My dog's going to start whining. Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths. Just feeling the body rise and fall. Each time we arrive at a meditation, we arrive at the momentum of all the previous moments. And the way that we escape the gravitational pull of all of that momentum is by sinking our awareness into the sensations of the present moment. So we'll begin by scanning through the body to be sure we're not holding any undue tension. Starting at the top of the head, relax the brow. If the eyelids have not already closed, allowing them to close or resting the eyes on one point. And as though we were continuing to close the eyelids, letting the eyes themselves drop back just a bit in the skull. Allowing the face to go smooth. Relaxing the back of the tongue. And allowing the jaw to go slack, no need to hold it closed. Relaxing the neck and the shoulders. Relaxing the shoulders enough that the arms drop a little towards gravity. Relaxing the upper arms, elbows, forearms, wrists, and relaxing the hands. Tuning into subtle sensations in the palms of the hands and tips of the fingers. Letting go of any attempt to control the breath, letting the body breathe as it will. And if there's some part of the mind that's telling you that you've experienced this in particular before, recognizing that this is a new sensation in a new moment. Relaxing the belly and the lower back. Relaxing the hips and the upper legs. The knees and calves. The ankles. And relaxing the feet. And then tuning into relaxation throughout the entire body as a whole. And bringing up some awareness of the breath sensations until we can detect some detail, not shrinking down to that size. Simply increasing the awareness of the breath until we can attend to these sensations and maintain awareness on the rest of the body and perhaps the rest of our sense experience. looking for a balance between these two. A balance that allows the mind to be more stable. And when distractions inevitably arise, allowing them to melt into the awareness, reestablishing this balance between the breath sensations and this open pool of other sensations, letting this larger awareness be a kind of buffer. Not allowing something to zip in and pull away our attention. A kind of soft atmosphere that holds and supports our attention on the experience of the breath. And whatever's happening in our practice, just being open to this. If the mind is quite jittery or foggy, knowing that that's natural. It's okay. Simply and gently, without any need to force, rearranging the pieces once again to find this balance. If it helps to use a label, just labeling this balance all. Now we're going to make a slight transition. Letting go of this breath practice, we're simply going to let our awareness and attention roam freely. Each time we land on or come in contact with a sensation, in the mind we're simply going to say the word yes. Fully opening to and accepting what's occurring, saying yes to each instant as it arises. What will likely happen is the body-mind will respond. Maybe it will push back, maybe it will effectively agree and accept what's occurring, but whatever occurs then, say yes. So instant by instant, whatever sensation or group of sensations arises, just say yes. And remember that each time you use this word, we want to respect our current experience. We're not using the word generically. We're saying yes to this precise experience in this precise moment. Maybe resistance arises. Perhaps an uncomfortable sensation arises and we begin to say yes. We don't like that. We don't want to say yes to discomfort. That's fine. We simply say yes to the ambivalence. So no matter what happens, it gets pulled into the gravitational well of the yes. saying yes to the entire gestalt of our experience, all of the current sensations in one moment. Like a flashbulb goes off, and we say yes to everything we can experience in this moment. And now saying yes to our seeing experience. The darkness of closed eyes, any sense of space, location, arrangement, any sense that we have a body below, an environment around. And I'm moving to the hearing experience, any external audio or mental audio, the sound of my voice, the sound of silence. Noticing that some seeing material may bleed into this process. It's not a problem. Whatever the arrangement or configuration is, just say yes. Now saying yes to the body experience, any emotion or other bodily sensation. Noticing that as we bring awareness to the sensations of the body, other sensations may bleed in, and that's fine. We're just foregrounding the body experience and knowing that what we did just a moment ago is likely to overlap into this experience. And once again, opening up to all sensory experience. Letting the yes ring through our entire sensory field. Saying yes to everything in our current experiential universe. including the empty space where we can't detect anything. Yes, yes, yes. And staying with the practice, staying in stillness, allowing a tiny bit of light to enter the eyes, eventually allowing the eyes to rest on one point as they fully open, and continuing this process of saying yes, whatever's arising. Yes, yes. Staying with the practice, but allowing the eyes and the head to begin to do their ordinary roaming around dance. If we can, detecting the momentum of the practice so far. And letting this transition be the teacher that shows us how to bring this practice into every aspect of our life. Okay, folks, welcome, welcome. As you begin to reformulate as a human body mind, just starting to make note, what was that experience like? What happened and what do you like now? Let's see here. Close one window. Okay. So what was that like? Let us know in the chat, or if you'd like to jump onto our Discord, the link is above. Frank says, that was very spacious, affirmative, wholesome, lovely. And just to know that if that was not your experience, I don't know if hopefully this link still works for our Discord. If it wasn't your experience, if it didn't feel affirmative, if it felt actually challenging or difficult or yeah, whatever it felt like, just know that that's what was supposed to happen, or the general structure that was, what it was like. What else? What happened for folks? Was that challenging? Were you just sleepy? That's often the case. Let's see here. Okay, if anyone does want to jump onto the Discord, it'll dump you into the welcome section. From there, feel free to put yourself into the voice waiting room. And then from there, I can pull you on over to questions and reports. If not, we'll slide into our conversation with Raquel. But I want to give people a moment to choose that and give Raquel a moment to hear my voice through the soundproof blanket, barely soundproof, and make her way over here. Okay, there she is. Want to grab a cushy?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh. Unwind myself. Okay, let's get this camera set because it's always different when we're together versus when we're apart. Where's that thing? Okay, well, that's how visible you are now. Okay, how do we do this? I'm going to move over. Oh, my face will be right in the chat.
Take my slide away.
And here, you got to move over. Okay, let's turn the camera. That's the idea.
That's one ticket.
Okay.
All
Lovely.
right, there we go.
Yeah. Okay. And, okay, folks. So, any questions for Raquel and I about relationships or about anything else? About the relationship of...
The relationship of tiny glasses to giant beards.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit. I think we're going to talk again about the multiple self model. If we'll just wait for any questions. I can't read that anymore.
Neither can I.
Hold on, I'll
it's
read it.
the worst of both worlds.
Okay. The yes automatically released any resistance, which was very freeing. That's lovely. And what's interesting, I mentioned before, but I'll mention again, is that sometimes it doesn't release things. Sometimes it creates more tension, and we want to just be open to that. It's in a way. My friend Deb really likes this practice. It was something suggested to us by, I'm tickling Raquel's feet by accident. I'm like, what's this? It was suggested by a teacher and friend named Soryu. Soryu for all.
Stop tickling my feet.
Oh, sorry. I don't mean to. Okay. So, and so it can be affirmative and can also feel very like jolting, like I don't want to say yes to this, but then we say yes to that, and it starts to teach us that no matter what happens, we can, allow that to expand in its own special way. So why am I not saying yes to everything already? It has already occurred anyway, so feels kind of stupid to resist, which causes resistance to lessen. That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. Why aren't we saying yes? Actually, during the practice, I was trying to decide whether or not to try the say no practice, because there is actually an entire school of meditation that they just say no over and over and over again, which is an interesting, it's a sort of, it's a Zen group, so of course it's probably a little confusing, but interesting practice. I started doing it. I just did it for a couple of rounds just to see what happened, and it felt totally different. It felt like it was amplifying resistance, and that was pretty uncomfortable. So it was interesting that it would probably push you to be very clear about how the system resists, even though you're just saying a word over and over again.
I feel like part of how Shinzen has talked about that no practice also is like it's referring to the no of emptiness. Mm-hmm. So that's another way of thinking about no.
Yeah, and I think that I'm sure it's meant to span the spectrum. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure it's like the context is anything specifically that you're coming in contact with at any given point, is my guess. So, okay, let's see. Next we have Nick, who says the body still perceives the pain as the survival threat, though. So it says yes. It's interesting when we confront uncomfortable stuff. It it's not asterisk stupid mobile keyboard. And here we go again with no. Yeah. And just, I mean, it's interesting how the system will know us all the time. And I don't want us to get caught in this idea that we have to be positive all the time or this kind of thing. But yeah, that was the practice today. It was a exploration in what Shinzen talks about as exploring new. So just as people are sort of trickling in here, welcome, Nasty a 6996, Maury, Nick, Mindfulness Bot, Megex Lurks, welcome, Jesh, Frank, Commander Root, and Atan, welcome. Feel free to follow if you want to know when we're going live, which is every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern.
That's the Wednesday symbol, in case you didn't know.
Wednesday. Okay. So we talked last Friday about the multiple self model, and we thought we would talk a little bit more about it.
Yes.
We kind of just introduced the fact that it could exist and there could be these multiple self experiences arising. And I think we want to talk a little bit about the interaction of these different parts. And at first it can sound a little remote. It can sound like, when do I have these parts experiences? Do I really experience these different selves? But actually, we have these experiences all the time. They're really, really common. In fact, if you've ever had the experience of saying, okay, I want to meditate, but I just want to lay down or I want to watch this show, that's an example of these two different parts. Maybe we could call them two different selves pushing against each other. And going in different directions. And often we feel like one is better than the other. One is idealized, like, oh, this is the good one. The one that wants to sit is good. But then there's part of me that wants to rest and hang out. So that's bad. And I got to get rid of that one. So, yeah, that's just one way that these can arise.
So do you want to talk about some of the common patterns that can happen in the relationships between these parts?
Yeah, I love that.
And I usually use the language of parts, and Janusz usually uses the language of multiple selves. So we're talking about the same thing when we say that, in case that's confusing at any point. So part of the theory behind this, which is derived from this thing called internal family systems, which is a kind of therapy that really talks a lot about parts and works from that premise. So one of the ideas in that this kind of therapy has mapped out is that there are patterns that often happen in how these parts relate to each other, particularly patterns that can cause suffering for us, and then also patterns that can release that suffering and create like a really deep experience of peace and freedom.
And before we move forward, I realize you're out of focus because you're closer, you're further. So can we just move you back diagonally this way? Like back. I think you'll be a little.
Better.
It's closer. Will you come back just another 6 inches?
Scorch.
Of course. Okay. So you were talking about patterns.
Yes, patterns and how these parts can interact. And we probably, most of us as I'm going through these patterns, have experienced some degree of each of these patterns. So like Janusz is saying, this isn't just theoretical stuff. Like as I'm talking, see if you can remember examples from your own experience, and I'll see if I can think of examples from mine also.
Yeah, and notice that often we don't notice selves as they arise because they feel either very natural or very neutral. So right now, maybe the self that is observing this, watching this, is pretty neutral. So it seems like, oh, this is the ordinary, usual self. But just know that maybe it's a little bit calm, maybe it's pretty chill, or whatever it is. Maybe it's anxious. Whatever that self that is arising right now, just know that there is often our system produces experiences of self all the time.
Totes. And even as you're watching, there's probably a little conversation in there, like, ooh, interesting. Oh, I'm bored. I wonder what's for lunch, etc., etc. So this was actually one of the ways that I first got the most firsthand access to noticing all these different parts, was being on retreat and really listening to the conversation in the mind. We often call it an internal monologue, which is such a misnomer. It's like a whole friggin' theater cast in there. So that's a really great way if you want to get some more experiential insight into this stuff that we're talking about in your practice. You can take some time to pause, suspend any quieting of the mind, and just let the voices roll and watch those voices. And pretty quickly, you'll probably start to notice a few different characters. I know I have like a rebellious one and a really compliant one and one that's like, okay, everything's fine. Like, let's move forward.
And I like to give mine silly names. So I have Judge Judy. I have Planning Pete, Teacher Tim, because teacher mind is a very real thing, you know. It's another mind that you're sitting there going, oh yeah, it's okay to think about this because I'm going to be helping other people, sharing about my experience, and the mind just thinking and thinking. And it's not, these selves aren't bad. I think if they go unrecognized, they can cause havoc.
Yeah, and so that's part of why it's so important to talk about the fact that these parts exist and the relationships between these parts. Is just like this foundational principle in meditation, this applies to the mind and to all of these parts. That where there isn't consciousness, behavior, emotion, our whole inner worlds can get driven and distorted. And that when we can bring consciousness, bring awareness to these different parts and the dynamics between them, then there's the possibility for healing and peace and growth, and not being driven in unconscious ways that end up manifesting sometimes in skillful behavior or in suffering that we're just like, where did that come from?
Yeah, and I think that something that is a central meditation principle is this idea that everything that occurs is nature, is okay, is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's not harmful just because the mind thought some certain thing or went in some certain way. And that's also what we want to develop as a relationship to these different parts, is that they're all natural. The way they manifest might be harmful, but they themselves, there's nothing wrong with them. We don't need to push some part of ourself away. And we've heard a million stories of people burying their own needs, and in some way or another, the sort of classic trope that you hear, and less so in America now, but this idea that somebody identifies as gay and then they hide that and it just comes out in all these like really intense ways. Or for myself, for a long time, I didn't like the idea that I was flawed or that I made mistakes. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I got to be perfect. And that creates so much anxiety because I wouldn't allow the flawed self to be there and to make mistakes. And interestingly, as I allowed that self to be there, I think I made less mistakes and I sort of just cared less. And that tends to be the case.
Yeah, yeah. Will you read this most recent comment?
I'll go ahead. You keep chatting.
Took my glasses.
You chat and I'll read it. Go ahead.
Are you going to read it silently?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, how's this going to work? Okay. So we all grow up in family systems of one kind or another, and those family systems tend to hold certain emotions or certain parts as good and certain emotions and certain parts as less good. So, for example, I grew up in a family that actually experiences a lot of fear, is very fear-driven, but doesn't talk about fear. So the way that family system relates then gets mirrored in my internal family system. Mm-hmm. So I notice when I start to watch which part is leading in any given moment, when I first started to watch that, I realized that the default was often a somewhat anxious or scared part leading, because that's the way that my family is. There's often a sort of scared, anxious flavor that's leading how they see the world, the choices that they make, what they like and don't like, etc. And because my family doesn't have such a conscious relationship with that, there wasn't a lot of consciousness around that for me. It was like a fish in water. So one way that these relationships between parts gets formed is just as a mirror from what we've experienced in our families. And part of the idea of this is that we all have internal families that mirror our lived experience with our real external families.
Yeah, and I was just about to say something. The unknowing part arose. What was I going to say? About parts knowing each other. The fact that these parts have different leaders at different points, and it tends to be the case that one will either be trying to lead or be leading. It's rare that sort of two are in charge, and the system sort of tends to want to find one that will lead. Is that accurate in IFS, or is there?
Not exactly.
Not exactly. Okay, either way. This is my personal, this is the nice thing. I can just disagree with anything that, is said in this internal family systems model, because I can talk about my own experience. So my own experience is that the system tends to say that there is one self and that it's always in charge and that it's always been the same self, and it puts that self as the driver at any given point. And then when ambivalence comes up, these different selves, there is, it's hard to pick which driver is there. So often for me, the system will want to go offline. Like, this is so confusing, so intense. I want to take a nap because there's so much, turbulence in this attempt to whatever the thing is I want to do. So the leader self sort of fades into the background, or the ability for a self to lead fades away, and there's just this sort of turbulence that's overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think so. So let me talk about an IFS way of formulating, I think, what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's also like we're not just teaching straight internal family systems at all. We're using that as a sort of template, but just so folks know, we're not here to explain strict internal family systems. And Frank asks, is IFS and the sort of true self notion, what we call true being, is that compatible with Buddhism? And my answer is yes, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Totally. So let me respond to what you were saying. So often there is one part that's leading. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And which part that is has a big impact on the choices that we make, the way we perceive the world, etc. It's essentially each part is essentially its own person or personality, and it's like we're seeing through that part.
And can you give any personal examples, just so it's not like
yeah. So I just did. So I just talked about how when I first started looking at which part was leading, I noticed that there was often this sort of anxious, scared part leading. And what that meant was the mind often felt a little grippy and was often sort of subtly planning and managing in the background and trying to preempt danger, and then would go into situations from that perspective. So that would shape my actions. So like I have an interview coming up today, and that scared part was starting to lead a little bit. And as I was thinking about the interview, if I was thinking about it from a place of this like true being leading, there would be a sense of calm and confidence and clarity, a sense of connection. So that imagination of going into the interview from the leadership of true being might look like, oh, I'm getting to meet a new person. I can share about myself with them. We'll see what happens afterwards. I feel good about it. I feel calm. I feel confident. And instead, there was a little bit of that worrying mind thinking about this situation. So like, oh, will they like me? Am I going to say the right things? Am I going to blow it? Oh, I think it's raining. How am I going to deal with like my lady interview shoes in the rain? That sort of like chewing on it mind. So that scared, anxious mind worrying mind was leading.
Great.
So this is talking about how one part can often lead. And ideally, more and more as we do this work, true being, or what's called self in IFS, so that can be really confusing in Buddhist contexts, that true being will be in the leadership position. And part of what that true being is this intuitive leader that we all have in our minds that we just need to learn to access and learn to trust more, to experience more of that peace and ease and confidence and clarity and connectedness.
Yeah. And there's such a close correlation between these two that I don't even know if it's a correlation anymore. It seems like a 1-to-1 ratio. In Buddhism, what we talk about is awareness. And this true self. It's interesting because basically, in a sense, we're asking people to learn to effectively identify with awareness. which is, in terms of Buddhism, is a little problematic because we want to learn to disidentify with everything, more or less, at some point. But as an intermediary stage, it would be great if everybody identified with awareness. The nice thing, there's two nice things about it. One is it would be really helpful for most people, and they'd probably be less likely to harm themselves than others. But two, there's not a lot of actual space for what we think of as self, or sort of self-absorbed ego, like the problematic parts of self in awareness. It has all the emptiness, it has all the spaciousness, the peace. So in a way, if we're going to identify with any experience, well, that's a pretty good one. Imagine if we just identified the real me deep down is emptiness and this sort of beautiful, spacious neutrality. Well, that's pretty much actually what we're asking for. And, from a Buddhist perspective, eventually you want to learn how to let go of any identification. But that's a really clear delineator between psychology and Buddhism. In psychology, in a sense, you're trying to develop a coherent self-narrative, a sort of self-structure that is not in great conflict with itself and the world. And in Buddhism, there's sort of an extra layer there where then you deconstruct that even further. It's not that clean. There's definitely a lot of overlap in both directions, and that's kind of a gross arc of the way you might look at the two.
Yeah, and it's this interesting thing where in IFS they talk about this, what they call self or true being, as like what's actually me. And yet there isn't in that space the feeling of identification or self-centered fear or even so much identity creation. There's more of a sense of being tapped into a universal quality that flows on its own. So I actually experience a lot of overlap, maybe even a one-to-one, of what I might have called being in non-self, or like abiding in source, as this allowing true being to lead. It's like a force that exists in everyone, and there's just like a trusting it and allowing it to manifest without the like, this is me, this is who I am, this is my story.
I need to defend this. I need to show people this is a worthwhile thing that exists.
I need to be afraid for this. It just flows. And I think one of the ways I've heard you talk about it as like awareness plus, because I think one of the really important qualities of this true being is that it isn't completely neutral. It's actually caring and an agentic leader. So it's
agentic. Will you?
It has agency.
Agent. I didn't know what that meant.
Then probably lots of people don't. So part of its role is more like an ideal parent in the internal system. So I wouldn't, if I was like, my mom is so great, I wouldn't be like, my mom is such a great mom. She's so neutral. Like, I hurt my knee when I was 6 and she didn't give a fuck. She did not care one way or the other. I'd say my mom was such a great mom. She was so caring and present in that moment. And so there, that quality of being is within all of us.
Yeah. And when we talk about caring, we can kind of get that wrapped up in terms of what that means. Caring, does it mean like loving and affectionate, etc.? It actually means care. It means that whatever that is can meet our needs. It can meet us where we are. Maybe there's in our imaginary scenario with your loving mom, maybe there's a part where she, gives you care and helps you mend your knee. And maybe there's a part where what you need is, hey, get up and go out there and do the thing. And actually, so it's actually responsive to our needs. And care doesn't just necessarily mean like the love self. It's just like, oh, ooey gooey. It's like actually,
it's a leader.
It's a leader.
It's a leader.
It's actually a leader. So we have a great question here from Nick. He says he has lots of paralysis analysis, and there's different parts that are debating, creating a kind of no way out experience, a stalemate. And is there a way that you can somehow avoid this? And that gets to really our prescription. This is sort of the direction that we suggest how to use this. This is the theoretical side. And we have some guided meditations if people want to contact me, if you want to have contact with those guided meditations. But we have a prescription.
Yeah, I mean, so this is such a great question. So one piece of this is starting to notice and get clear about the different voices in that conversation. And so one classic way that parts can relate in a way that induces this experience of stuckness is what's called polarization. And this often means that there's one part holding one position and another, where is it? There it is. And another part holding another position. And they seem opposing. And one part will get more extreme to win. And then the other part will get more extreme to balance that out. And then the other part will get more extreme. And then the other part will get more extreme. And then the two voices end up sort of locked. And this can happen especially when there isn't a lot of leadership from that true being. It's like an argument between two 4-year-olds, and like they don't know how to resolve their argument. They just are like, I want the toy. No, I want the toy. No, I want the toy. Like, I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. And so first is just to notice these two pieces. And then start to be able to bring some of this quality of the listening and awareness coming from true being. And that can just look like listening to those two voices in a curious way. So often what happens is these two voices arise, these two parts are talking, and it's like, I fully believe this one. Oh, wait, no, I fully believe this one. Oh, wait, no, I fully believe this one. And that adds to the stalemate. So in this, we're bringing in the quality of watching curiously both of these parts. And that just naturally starts to bring in the possibility of leadership from true being.
Yeah. And actually, I just remembered also that we have a video that you did on procrastination, which is you're talking
super
about
relevant
this.
to this.
If Tomalin is on the line, it's on our main YouTube channel, and it's on procrastination. If you wouldn't mind throwing that link in the stream, or if anyone else has access to that. And why is it that as soon as I start talking, I just immediately forget what I was talking about? Okay. What did you just say? Just briefly.
Curiously listening to the parts that are arguing.
Curiously listening to the parts that are... Oh, yeah. So a concept that I've talked about a lot in meditation is this idea of the mind recognizing things through contrast. And when we show the mind one thing, if I say, pay attention to nothing at all but my hand, do not pay attention to anything else but my hand, right? Immediately the mind just starts sort of picking up on it. It's like, okay, I got the hand, and then it starts like looking for other things. So one self will, thank you for that. One self will say, oh, you should be meditating right now. And then we sort of like hear that, and it almost triggers the other self that's like, well, the opposite of that. So often it's a sign that we're pushing down certain parts if the contrast pushes right back up. If you say, I'm going to make the mind silent, well, guess what's going to happen? The mind's going to push these giant pieces of audio out that are like really intense. So sometimes it's actually, we can find the suppression in just noticing the dialogue, noticing the conflict itself.
Totally. And so as we're bringing in this curious awareness that's watching both of the parts rather than identifying with one and then identifying with the other, you can start to actually have a conversation with those parts from the curiosity, the curious place of that true being. You can ask each part, like, what do you need? And often each part, if it's stuck in a stalemate, is advocating for some important need. And often when the parts are just arguing with each other, the needs seem conflicting. And part of the leadership capacity of true being is to be able to negotiate the needs of these two parts. So in the procrastination video, and this is something that often comes up for me, there's like one part that had a need or was advocating for rest and easefulness, and another part that had a need or was advocating for success and achievement. And those seemed opposed when it was just the two parts arguing with each other. But bringing in that curious awareness of true being was able to say, oh, we can find a way to meet both of these needs. So it was able to say, okay, I totally hear you, part A, that is really holding the importance of rest and ease. And I really hear you, part B, that's holding the importance of success. And so let's move forward with the task at hand, but in a really gentle and easeful way. Like, moving forward doesn't have to mean driving hard. We can do that in a gentle and easeful way. And then with that negotiation from true being, those two parts that were arguing, they depolarized. It's like they got quieter in volume, and the sense of stalemate between them just like move, like power down, because they felt heard and the needs that they were advocating for were met. So when we have these places where it feels stuck, or like these voices are just going back and forth, it's often that they're just arguing with each other without the leadership from true being, without this quality of a curious, kind, confident awareness that can watch the whole system and negotiate and hear and negotiate the needs of all the parts.
Yeah. And something that I've done here on the stream before, maybe you recall, but we did a guided meditation where you begin by, it takes the form of a metta practice. Doesn't end up being that exactly, but the premise is that you start by just knowing that there's a kind of ideal, harmless being that is just deeply deserving of kindness and compassion in front of you. You don't have to imagine it. You can do this now as I'm talking, but just in front of you is this being that is just, you know that it's this kind, compassionate thing. You don't even have to create an image or anything. It's just so known, and it actually pulls the kindness from you. It's actually so deserving of kindness that it's pulling the kindness from you, pulling the kindness from you. And once you get a real taste for that, a real sense of what that experience is like, you then take that being and you just move it inside your body, and you start doing it to yourself. You say, okay, loving kindness, and the ease with which you experience this sort of connection with this being. Hey, listen, what happens when you do that internally? And often what arises is the part of us, well, what can arise is a part of us that doesn't feel that we deserve that, doesn't feel that that's okay, and there's a kind of turbulence. It's not quite as easy as when we're directing it towards this sort of abstract being. And that's one way to very quickly notice a part that is pushing against. We actually, part of this was, we started using this because when people do heart practice or practices where they're saying loving phrases to themselves or to other people, often this other part arises. This is the mind noticing by contrast. In the mind, you're sort of cultivating love in the mind or something, and so you're saying, I love you to yourself or to the world, and the mind keeps going, this is stupid. Why are you doing this?
You're such a fake.
This is so...
What a phony.
This is so new agey stupid. Crystals and moonbeams. So this other part of self arises, and it's not a problem, right? It's not a bad thing. For me, I had to recognize that other self, it's like, this is stupid. Well, what does that self want? That self wants to be okay. Often the needs are very infantile. It's just like, I want to be okay. I want to feel safe, right?
I want to be judged.
Yeah, I don't want to be judged, right? Maybe it's considering other people. So, and again, the not being judged comes back to safety, feeling, not being afraid, feeling safe. So what I can do is say, hey, from this other voice, this more kinder, the place where the kindness is coming from, I can say, hey, I hear you. I'm so sorry you feel that way, but I'm right here. And often we can intuit what that voice needs to hear. It's often not like direct. Sometimes it's like, the statement is, this is stupid, new agey crap. And the response, because the true self or true being knows the response. Its nature
it's intuitive.
Its nature is that it sort of knows. So what does it know that would solve this, difficulty? And for me, the answer was like, hey, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere, which doesn't make sense as a response to like, this is stupid, new agey stuff. But it calmed that self. It soothed and made that self feel more safe. And it did it. And then I just use that. That's my loving kindness phrase. I use that over and over again. And then it changes and it becomes a bit of a dialogue where I'll say something and then eventually the difficult self will say something back. And I start to learn to identify which self is more stable, which self do I like more. And just the ability to know that there are these selves is like a really powerful transformative experience.
And a really important piece of what you're talking about is that this is a path of getting to know and accepting and valuing all of the parts. So even the parts that seem like they're just being difficult or causing problems, chances are they're holding something really important. So we learn to listen to them and to meet those needs in a way that is caring for the whole system.
Yeah. And another part of this, which we've mentioned already, is learning to really get a taste for, in Buddhist terms, we just say awareness, really getting a taste for that and a taste for what is it like to observe that this is occurring. And if we can ever detect that there's a self there, we can check if we're identifying with that self, because we'll have a sense, okay, this is me. This is happening to me. I'm trying to think of like something to immediately pull up a self. But so imagine that I was like to yell at you right now. I'm not going to do it. This is an example, but I was like, rah, 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 yell, rah, rah, right, pointing and all that stuff. When someone points at us, it feels very like, ugh, right? So often it feels like, okay, that is me. And if we observe that, it changes to, oh, there it is, right? So it's like, oh, here I am, and you're pointing at me. I don't like that. Versus like, oh, look, this body-mind system is creating a self. That's quite natural. Of course it would. That sounds really difficult. Oh, that's really hard. And it's not just conceptually saying those words, it's actually getting the awareness to be able to step outside a little bit and observe that occurring in the body-mind system. And eventually learning to, I want to say identify, but you used a good word, which is abide in that awareness.
I noticed we have another comment here. Do you want to read it up?
The comment is Nick saying, now I have an internal kindergarten, but where are all the adults? And he says that he needs to watch this again when he's not in the office.
Totally. Yeah, and that's exactly the adult, is that true being. And it's in there. Something that I really like doing, which maybe we can create some guided meditations for a YouTube video about. In the IFS, Internal Family system, there are these 8 C's that are qualities of this true being that all happen to start with C. There are other ones also, but it's a nice list that's easy to remember.
You can tell that there was like 4 C's and 4 other things, and he's sitting there for weeks racking his brains like,
how can I make this a C word?
I want 8. I need 8 words. They have to begin with. And he started with like the letter P, and it's like, personable, whatever. Anyway, so there's 8 C's.
Maybe. And taking this principle that true being is there for all of us. It's just inborn. It's a natural gift of having a human mind. Can bring this faith of, okay, so this body-mind system has experienced all of these qualities before. It just needs to sort of tune into those frequencies. So in my practice, I will drop in these C words, just sort of, what? These C words.
I'll drop in the C word.
And just allow, it's like just saying the word and then just allowing the body and mind to occupy that way of being. So just sort of say, calm. The body and mind have been calm before. Maybe it was just for a second, but they know what that feels like. And then just allowing the body and mind to feel that experience of calm. Sometimes I'll pose it as a question. How would this body and mind feel if they were calm right now? I'm just allowing the body and mind to respond in an experiential way of embodying, being that adjective. And that's a really great way of learning to experientially contact the flavor of what it feels like to be in true being.
Yeah. And even to know the definition of the word calm, there's some part of us that knows that. So we're just tapping into that part. And what you were saying with what would it feel like if X, Y, and Z is a really great prompt, because it goes back to this idea about the mind noticing contrast. It says, what would this be like if it were X? And it can say, okay, well, it's not this now, but what if it were? And it notices this sort of the other side of it. So it, in effect, starts to produce that. We notice that in guiding meditations. It's like, what would this part of the body feel like if it were more relaxed? And it weirdly, like,
it knows.
It just to explore what would it feel like, it just pushes you in that direction. So it's a pretty powerful prompt. But I want to hear the 8 C's.
Oh, let's see if I can remember them all. Test time.
Well, I know hey, you set yourself
Set
up here.
myself up, yeah.
This is the Rick, was it Rick Perry with his 3, anyway.
Oh God, the 3 R's and you couldn't. Oh no, that was on Veep.
3 R's? No. There was a debate a long time ago, and Rick Perry was one of them, and he said, I would eliminate 3 government agencies, and he named 2, and he's like,
Nerf.
and that was like the end of his candidacy, so.
Back when candidates could get ousted.
Yeah,
Back
exactly.
when it mattered.
A mistake mattered.
What you can do, yeah. Okay, so C's. Calm, curious, confident, creative, connected, clear.
Conscious?
I don't think that's one of them. Okay, I got 6 out of 8. That's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Okay, well.
Confident. Did I say that already?
Yes.
Oh.
Exactly. Okay.
What's his last comment saying?
It says the letter E.
It's the one before that.
Oh, it says, I often say, what would be the most comfortable way to breathe right now? If I can remember to. Yeah, that's great. That's it. It's the same thing as like a koan, right, in a sense asks you to answer a question that there is no answer to. So it puts the mind in this very weird position where there's sort of like a momentum of not knowing. It's like, what does this look like if it's not here now? And you're asking the mind, like, what would this be if it's not here? And it puts the mind in a very weird shape in the same way that the mind will sort of follow the carrot, as it were.
And the answer is experience. The answer is
Yeah.
a spontaneous experiential arising.
Yes.
Not a analytical thinking through.
Exactly. So that works for part 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So hopefully that was enjoyable and fun. And if you're watching this on replay, or if we make a separate video of this, make sure to like and subscribe. Is that what you say at the end of videos? And
Smash that like button.
yeah, smash it. Just God. Let the violent self come out. So lovely. Well, thank you, folks, for letting us do that. If you have any particular questions about any particular thing, I think we're going to open up an area. And actually, I've been meaning to ask Tamerlan if he could do this. So, Tamerlan, if you're on the line, just make a mental note, or if you want to do it soon, is to make a new section in our Discord that is questions for stream. So people can ask at any time, that we'll have these questions here. And you can put, Raquel and Janusz, if you want both of us to answer, if you want it to be on the Friday stream. We're trying to make this more of a ritual where we get Raquel to come on for the chat at the end of the week. But I'll tell you what, we're going to be back here in less than 72 hours, do some meditation, have some fun, and have a good time. So thank you so much for joining us, folks. It is always a delight to be here with you. Thanks, folks.
Thank
you for attending. Thanks, Maury, Nick, Mindfulness Bot, Megexa, Lurks, Jesh, Fushi, Commander Root. Oh, there's Bernie. What is it? Bernie is cool. Oh, Bernie is cool. I was like, Bernie's cool. Bernie is cool. And Aten. So feel free, if anyone isn't following already, feel free to follow. That's free. And love to see you folks soon.
Great to be with you.
See you soon. I'm going to put on the ending screen, but we can still hear you here. Outro. Okay. Oh, the Discord channel's created. Thank you, Tamerlan. That now exists. And we're going to switch to our little intro here. Outro. Great to see you, folks.
Bye.
Have fun today. Thanks for joining.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, wherever you are in the world. Always nice to be here with you. What other exit words should we say?
Have a good weekend.
Sayonara.
Adieu.
Bon voyage.
Later.
That
was Hebrew.
It sounded like you said later on in Hebrew. What did you say?
Litrot. It means
Litrot.
like we'll see each other soon. It's like nos vemos.
Cowabunga, dudes. Exactly. Thanks, Nick. Don't let the... What's the phrase? don't let the door hit you where God hit you, or something like that. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. There's something like that where it's like, don't let the door hit you when you're in the place that God. It's something about your butt.
It's a metaphor for a butt.
Well, we're talking
A simile for a butt.
We're talking about a butt here, okay? If you notice, we're talking about a butt. Raquel and I are actually really silly, and we've been trying to figure out like a venue to exercise our silliness. Maybe it's exactly this in the outro screen. Yeah. Just talking about
meditating about butts.
Welcome to the Butts live stream. Butts are universal. Surf's up. Exactly. Daniel Ingram has this great version of a hillbilly meditation teacher. It's so good. He's like, I gotta get that on video. He's like, what does he say? He's like, you know what your problem is? Thinking. Too much thinking. You're thinking and thinking. Sometimes it just takes over your whole world. That's the problem. Stop thinking. He does it much better than me. Alright folks, lovely to see you as always. Very excited to connect with you again in less than 72 hours in this very same place. Okay folks, have a lovely day. We'll see you soon.